Hi, smart moms and dads. Welcome to this episode of the Brainy Moms podcast. I'm Dr. Amy Moore, and I am here with Teri Miller. And Teri and I just got back from a homeschool conference in Denver, Colorado. And I did a couple of workshops related to ADHD. And some of the questions that I got in both workshops had to do with the emotion dysregulation piece in ADHD. It seems to be a real pain point for sure. And oddly, like emotion dysregulation isn't even in the diagnostic criteria. It blows my mind that
Yeah.
it's such a debilitating aspect of ADHD, not just for kids, but for adults too with ADHD. And it's just not talked about enough. And I thought we could have a conversation about it.
Okay. Yes, it's something that's really important to me. I have kiddos that struggle with ADHD in my family, and just with kids that I have worked with in my work and my career, I hear that really frequently from parents that they'll come in and they might be concerned about, oh, his grades aren't going well. He's having trouble in school. But the bigger issue they're concerned about is behavior. Is that meltdown, frustration with homework, pitching a fit with homework, that kind of thing. And I have definitely dealt with that personally. And so I think it's a really important thing to talk about and to just give parents some hope and maybe some answers, what's really going on underneath the surface. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand what's happening in the ADHD brain because that creates empathy rather than frustration with our kids. And so there are disrupted connections in the ADHD brain between the emotion area and the prefrontal cortex. And so the prefrontal cortex is the CEO of the brain. It's what's responsible for planning and memory and execution and reasoning skills. And the connections from the amygdala and just the emotion area of the brain, those are disrupted in the ADHD brain. And then we can also look at brain scans and see that there's not enough oxygenation to the prefrontal cortex, right? So that impacts reasoning skills. And we can look at glucose metabolism on PET scans and see that the ADHD brain isn't as efficient at using glucose for energy as a non-ADHD brain is. I mean, glucose is the main source of energy for the brain. So if it's not very efficient at using its energy source, then it isn't going to work as well. And then there are some differences in brain volume between the ADHD brain and a non-ADHD brain. So the ADHD brain is a tiny bit smaller. So there are differences in the brain that we can visualize on neuroimaging scans.
And
So
I
think
can
that's
I go back to
Yeah,
a
yeah.
couple things you said?
Yeah.
Just for our listeners, they may be wondering the same thing I am. Okay, so you mentioned prefrontal cortex not as oxygenated for an ADHD brain. And so is that something that we can do something about? Is that really affected by the deep breathing exercises, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I've never gotten before, and I don't know the answer. So we'll have to delete this part.
Okay. All right, can feel it real quick. John was like, I was thinking, what do I have control of? And I was thinking of, oh, if I could help increase oxygenation with teaching some breathing exercises. And then I thought, when you said the glucose thing, and I thought this when you presented, can I do something about that? So what if I have 3 days out of the week that my child goes into ketosis, that I do fat-based meals? See, I don't know, things like that. Can I do anything about it? That was just, I wanted to jump on that because I thought, hey, if I keep wondering that, maybe other people are too. Were you
Yeah.
looking it up?
Yes, I love that question because it's really important. Like we understand what's happening, but then what can we do about it? And mindful breathing is one way to get oxygenation, and then physical exercise. And we know there are tons of benefits of physical exercise for any brain, not just the ADHD brain, that aerobic activity increases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow for the brain. And that is another way to drive oxygen. to the prefrontal cortex for sure. So that's a really great question. In terms of glucose metabolism, so in people who have had traumatic brain injury, that is one hypothesis of recovery, that if we put a brain injured patient on a ketogenic diet for 30 days, and then it forces the brain to use ketones, energy, rather than glucose, perhaps that gives the brain a chance to recover. In terms of a long-term strategy, especially for a non-injured brain, but just for ADHD, we don't have any research on that. And while it's an interesting question, it's not something that I'm prepared to recommend at this point because I haven't seen any research on it. So I certainly wouldn't want to say, yeah, try that. Because compliance is super hard, especially with kids, and kids need carbohydrates for multiple reasons. One, to produce serotonin. So I think it's important to focus on a well-rounded plate rather than ketosis unless there's an injury. And even then, that's still in the hypothesis research phase for brain injured patients. But that's a really fascinating question for sure.
Yeah. Just thinking about what can I do? I don't know. Like that's just such an important one.
Yeah. So when we get to the blah, 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 I'm so proud. I do want to go back to that mindful breathing as something that we can teach our kids and do ourselves as adults who have ADHD. And so let's talk about that in a couple minutes. When we get to what could we do for that emotion dysregulation piece. But really, I just wanted to explain some of those differences in the brain to help everyone understand it just doesn't work the same way.
Right.
But what we're seeing is something called rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And that is this extreme emotional response to perceived criticism or rejection or withdrawal of love. Perceived is the key word here. If we think someone is criticizing us, rejecting us, withdrawing their love from us, if they don't like us, if they say something that feels like criticism, then about 80% of adolescents and adults with ADHD suffer from rejection-sensitive dysphoria. So that instance will throw us into an emotional tailspin.
So what might that look like for, let's say, give a couple examples, my school-age kid, maybe 10, and then my teenager, what could that look like? What am I going to be seeing?
Sure. So if you were giving feedback to your child about their schoolwork and you said, this has a lot of mistakes, you obviously didn't work very hard. That could be perceived as, you think I'm dumb, you think I'm stupid, you think I'm lazy. That's perceived rejection or criticism. And so that could set a child off.
Okay.
So that's one example. Another example is when we impose a consequence.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, what if it's normal part of parenting?
Yeah. So a parent could impose a consequence, and that could feel like withdrawal of love. That could feel like you are rejecting me because I've done something wrong, and that punishment feels way bigger than it might be. And so then you hit an emotional tailspin. And what's happening in that emotional tailspin is that the amygdala is hijacking the prefrontal cortex, right? You're hitting fight or flight or freeze mode. I like to call that Hulk brain rather than Bruce Banner brain. And then you can't reason and you can't think. And what we do know, this is fascinating too, what we do know in the ADHD brain, Dr. Christina Ledbetter and I did this really big study on more than 5,000 kids and adults with ADHD. And we looked at their cognitive profiles. And what we found was that working memory was the most efficient of all of the cognitive skills. Well, we need strong working memory when we are trying to reason through options. And so one of those things that's happening in the ADHD brain in that fight or flight mode is that we just can't access all of the alternatives, all of the explanations. We can't hold them in our mind and then act on them. And so everything becomes a crisis. It's all a crisis.
So what can we do? I'm gonna just throw out, I do this a lot with you, Amy, that I'll say, real life scenario happened this morning.
All right, bring
So
it.
my youngest that I have at home, the rule is that they don't, in the summertime, they don't get on screens until 2 o'clock, because otherwise they would be on screens all day long, like for 10 hours. Instead of, if I say that, at least maybe then it's only 2 to 7, only 5 hours. But anyway, that's the rule. He's been doing this sneaky thing and getting up early and playing video games before the rest of us are up and around. But I hadn't caught him yet. I knew he was. I would see him shift away, close the computer. This morning I walked out and he was just headphones on, going away. And I was like, buddy, better that you know the rule. And so that's just it. We've talked about this before. And so no more screens today. I'm going to need to go ahead and take your computer and you need to give me your phone. The tailspin you're talking about? So what do I do? What do I do as a parent? How could I have done that better?
Okay, I love that example. Love that example.
Oh, gosh.
That's actually a big example, right? That is not just, hey, maybe you could have said it this way. That actually goes back to why is that boundary the way it is? And you explained that a little bit, right? You're worried that they're going to spend all day, every day on screens. So did you come up with that boundary and that rule alone, or was that a conversation with your kids?
It was actually a conversation because we talked about how many hours do you think is appropriate?
Okay.
And they said summertime, maybe 4 to 5 hours.
Okay.
And then we observed it a few times and taught and discussed it. And they agreed that when they started screens at 10, it was very difficult and they were angry to stop screens after 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
So we did discuss it.
So then how did you determine that 2 p.m. was appropriate or would be the boundary?
It was just, that's usually when rainstorms come in the mountains of Colorado. And so that's when, hey, you could be out riding bikes, you could be hiking, whatever. But by 2, it's come on in. It's going to be a yucky afternoon.
Okay. So that was part of the conversation though.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we talked about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you talk ahead of time? Hey, what happens if you guys don't honor this boundary?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And what did you come up with?
The 3 strikes you're out. Like the first time, it's okay, we forget. Second time, hey, I understand. I know it's really hard. Third time, you lose your screens for the day.
And then did you clearly identify what screens were?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So phones were part of that?
Yep.
Okay.
For the 2 little ones, because they don't have service, their phones are only for games, little fun things they're doing.
Okay. So it doesn't act as a connection piece. It's a...
Not for
So
them.
listeners, the reason why I asked her about phones is that I'm not a fan of taking phones away as a consequence. And I've talked about this in a couple of other episodes, but phones are a way that our kids can be connected to people that they love. And connection is the #1 buffer against mental health crisis. You hear me say that all the time. And so my advice is not to use a phone as a punishment. But in this case, the phone does not connect them with anyone. It's just for gameplay.
Right. Yeah. Because we're talking like 11, 12.
Yeah.
And so my teenage kids, and you know what? I may have done this because of your influence, Amy, because I think I used to, when phones were newer with my older kids, because I have a kid that's turning 30. So I've had a lot of it. But when they were newer in our home, I would do that. You lose your phone. That's a privilege. And I would take the phone away. And somewhere along the past several years, and I'm sure it's because of you, I was like, that is not a good idea. And so from my boys, my son that's 21 on down, I do not, that once they have that connection, I won't take it away. And sometimes I'll,
sorry for that.
Thank you.
So, all right. So it sounds like you did a phenomenal job, Teri, with having the discussion, problem solving with the kids as a group, having them come up with what those limits are going to look like, when those limits start. So great job on that. So then let's talk about this morning specifically. Instead of saying to your child, okay, give me everything, you've broken the rule, three strikes, you're out. How could you have turned that into a conversation?
I could have said, "Do you remember what the rule is? Can you tell me what our rule is?" And
Exactly.
then have him say it.
Yeah. So then he identifies that he's broken the rule. And so then you would say,
"And do you remember what the consequence was, buddy?" Yeah. I did not do that.
instead of you taking it away, say, so you need to put it away like you all determined.
Agreed. Yeah, even I could have even asked him, where do you like to put your computer and phone for the day?
Absolutely.
Oh, man. Can I have
Yeah,
a
because then what that does is it puts the responsibility solely on him, right?
Mm.
He helped problem solve, he helped create that boundary with the kids. And so you're still leaving him with that responsibility then. Okay, you've identified that you've broken this rule 3 times, and now you know what the consequence is. So I need you to take care of it.
Yeah.
And then he still may do it kicking and screaming, but it's still on him. You made the choice. Therefore, you need to.
So even if I had done that well, and I think even if I had done that better, I just knowing what's been going on, I think he would have had a meltdown anyway because of that. Anytime I have to ask more than once about something, or it's very upsetting to him. So once that tailspin happens, how should I handle it?
So you can't co-regulate from another room. I always say that. And co-regulation is bringing our calm to their fire. So when
Okay.
they are emotionally dysregulated, they're upset, they're in an emotional tailspin, it's our responsibility to stay calm and close and present. We can validate, hey, I know that was really upsetting. I'm sorry that you're going to have to find something else to do today. So I know that's tough. So you can validate what they're going through. I'm here if you need something.
Okay. I did
And
not do that either.
it's hard, right? But so what did you do?
I just needed to head out the door.
Okay.
And I was taking my other 2 kids to their theater camp, and I just had to go. And so I was like, let's, I did that, like, hand them over. And so I just took them with me. I literally brought them to the car with me because I just was in a hurry.
Yeah.
So I just wasn't in a position to sit with them. And that's not always true, but that does happen sometimes where the meltdown happens when you've got to get in the car and go. And yeah.
Yeah. Did he get in the car with you or he got
No,
okay.
he stayed.
So then you have a couple other options. So it's not a health or safety issue, meaning there's not an emergency happening. So you could have chosen to ignore it and address it tonight when you get home from work, when you do have time to sit with the fire that he's going, right? So you could have just patted him on the head, kissed him goodbye, whatever it is you do, and come on to work. And then when you got home, say, hey, we need to chat. I noticed this morning that you were playing video games, and can you remind me what the rule is for that? And had the conversation tonight when you have time then to also hold space for the big feelings that come after.
Yeah.
If it's a health or safety emergency, you can't do that, right? Sometimes you're just going to have to swoop in, solve the problem, fix it, change the
Yeah.
environment, whatever it is. But that was not an emergency. It is a
Right.
conversation that could have waited until you had time to fully explore
Yeah.
the fallout.
Yes.
Didn't do anything wrong. We're just talking about, like, how do we make this easier in the long term for us as parents and for our kids to be able to learn, A, how to honor boundaries and rules, but also what to do with the big emotions. Like, you left him with his big emotions and he doesn't know what to do with them now. That's tough. Yeah. But we all do it. We've all done it.
Yeah.
We've all dragged our kids kicking and screaming into the car because we're running late, pushed them out of the car on the school curb because we have to get to work, right? Like we mess them up. We screw the kids up. Even though we're experts in psychology, we still screw our kids up, right? Because we're human. And so we have to show ourselves grace for that and do the repair work if we need to.
The learning. I think this is so great. This conversation is amazing because this was a practical situation, and my head is going with the ways I could have done it different and the way I'm going to do it different next time, because I don't want to put this on him, but it's probably something similar is going to happen like tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I'm learning. So as long as I'm learning, as long as I knew it was uncomfortable, I knew something wasn't right, and I didn't handle it well, and gosh, that's really great help.
Yeah. And I think that's all we can do is debrief or reflect on the interaction and the exchange and our decisions and say, okay, what do we value as parents, right? What is important to us in terms of parenting? What do we hope that our kids take away from their childhood? And then we have to ask ourselves, okay, is how I handled that this morning consistent with what I value as a parent? And so that's hard, right? Like where we really have to break down, okay, do we want our kids to be loving and kind and empathetic and contributing members to society? Like, what is it that we value? And then what do we want out of our relationship with our kids, right? I want my kid to feel loved unconditionally. I want my kid to know that no matter what they do, I still love them, whatever your parenting values are. And then when you debrief, okay, how'd I handle that this morning? Are there holes in that? Did you detour? I like to call this a choice point. I adapted that idea from acceptance and commitment therapy, right? So a choice point where whatever I do or say is either leading me, pointing me towards what I value or away from what I value. If you could visualize that as a fork in the road, then you're able to say, okay, that was moving me away from what I value as a parent. So how could I do it differently next time so that it moves me towards what I value as a parent?
Hey, I've got some repair to do this evening, but I'll have to let you know personally how that goes tomorrow.
I would love to know that.
I want to ask another different ADHD question. So you talked about working memory as a big issue in the ADHD brain. And so another thing that I see in one of my different kids, ADHD kids, teenage gal, she really struggles making decisions. And like for her birthday, even things that she could do whatever she wants, she'll just wait till the last minute. She'll be like, I don't know if I want to do a bonfire with my friends. I'm not sure. And I don't know if they can all come. And she just hems and haws for weeks and she can't seem to make a decision. What's going on with that and how can I help her?
Well, that's a great question. Okay, so let me tell you the difference in how ADHD brains make decisions and non-ADHD brains make decisions. So if you don't have ADHD and you're faced with a decision, you typically choose the most important thing to focus on or to do first, then the next most important thing, and then probably something that might have a reward attached. That's normally the order in which we would choose something. In the ADHD brain, everything is important. All options look the same. And in the absence of that ability to rack and stack what's more important or what we like more or what would be more rewarding, because we can't differentiate, it's all important, so then it paralyzes us. So if you've got so many choices, then no choice is going to happen because we just can't decide which one is better.
Yeah.
And so in that case, it's probably best to narrow those choices down.
Okay.
So if you notice that, your child's paralyzed by this open-ended invitation, you could say, hey, I noticed that you're having trouble picking something. Would you like some ideas? And then maybe she'll say sure, and then have 3 ideas that you could offer.
Okay.
Then you could also help her determine pros and cons for each of those ideas. Because then when we start to break down the options, then it makes it a little bit easier to choose.
Okay. Yeah, an example was the birthday thing. It's been a while back, but what you're saying is what we went through. But the way I thought of it as, my brain was processing it as process of elimination, that I was helping her do that process of elimination. And so that I was able to be like, okay, if you had to choose between only doing something with your 2 best friends or having your whole theater group friends over, which would you choose? And she was able to pretty quickly, she narrowed it down like process of elimination. So each thing. And then ultimately she did land on the bonfire. But I should have done this process much earlier because my pen went like 2 days before. But I feel like that's the same thing that you're saying. Narrow her choices.
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a chance that when you give 3 choices instead of an open-ended choice, that none of those will seem exciting. Then you say, would you like 3 more choices, or do you want to break down the pros and cons of these first? And so you just have to be the coach or the guide on the side when you have those conversations. The good news is the success that she will feel at the end, that she's actually chosen something, that creates a new neural pathway. That is what narrowing down choices feels like.
Yeah.
And then the hope is the next time she might be able to apply that same technique, or you might have to do that 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 more times with her, right? Before she starts to say, okay, last time, this is how I made a decision. So it becomes a process that the ADHD brain learns rather than it being a natural rack and stacking of priorities.
Okay. That's so good. And why, as parents, do we so often think, I told you that once and we talked about it again last week. And so why are you fixing it? And yet, if we think about toddlers, kids learning to talk, whatever, we have to go over please and thank yous a million times before it really sticks. And before you'll have that moment where they open something at Christmas and look up and go, thank you.
And again, so that same study that I mentioned before, that working memory was the most deficient skill, we actually identified 3 deficient cognitive skills. It was working memory, long-term memory, and processing speed. So applied to this scenario, you have to be able to hold all of the options in your mind at the same time, that's working memory, and act on them, which is making a choice. You have to do it in a reasonable amount of time, right? That's a processing speed issue. And the long-term memory piece comes in when you have to remember, how did I solve a similar situation the last time? Or how much did I enjoy a similar experience, right? So when you're having trouble retrieving memories, when you're having trouble holding options in your mind to act on them, and because your processing speed is slow, right? That gives you even more opportunity to forget what's in your mind, right? Because it's taking too long to make the decision. So we have to come behind and support all of that. Interestingly, this has nothing to do with attention. Did you notice? Has nothing to do with
So
attention.
interesting.
Because
It's the attention is a symptom, right, of the real underlying cognitive skill problem.
yeah, we automatically think, because hello, it's named wrong, attention deficit disorder, when we don't have a deficit of attention, we have too much attention. We pay attention to everything. Like I'm saying, all options are important, or everything's a crisis, right? We pay attention to it all to the point where it's paralyzing, or we have an emotional meltdown. So if we don't look at strengthening or plussing up or supporting memory and processing speed, then we're going to have this same conversation again and again.
Okay. Gosh, this is just This is so important, these kind of conversations and learning, listening to podcasts, reading books just as a parent, because if we're not intentional, it is way too easy to just be impatient, to think the behavior's the issue, you're just rebellious, you're just disrespectful, all these things that we do, that we tend to, that we just want to shake our head, take them and shake our heads, that really we can, first of all, have compassion. I love that you made that the first number one issue so that I can take that breath and think, he's not doing this on purpose. This is really a struggle for him. But then number two, I'm not going to let that be an excuse and say, he's not doing it on purpose. That's just his ADHD brain. That's just what's happening. So I'll just let him continue acting that way, because that's not preparing him for the real world. And so then you're giving us some solutions, practical solutions. And I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, and I think it's super important too, when you're parenting with consequences, to ask yourself, what lesson does this consequence give my child? Because we think of discipline as punishment, when really the word discipline comes from the word disciple, which means to teach. And so we want to teach our kids, hey, this is how you problem solve. This is how you decide whether you are going to act this way versus that way, right? We want our kids to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because they are afraid of being disciplined or punished, because that actually doesn't prepare them for the real world.
Right.
What prepares them for the real world is critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, that ability to talk through options and then be able to choose the best one. And so I like to I like to recommend that everything is a conversation first. Everything is a conversation first, unless it's a safety emergency.
Right.
Your kid's in the middle of the street. You better go get your kid out of the street. That is not a conversation. That's an emergency. Most things are not emergencies. And so we have to recognize parenting young children is temporary, and it does take extra time to have conversation. It's a whole lot easier just to impose a consequence.
Yeah.
But does that equip them for not doing it again?
It's about taking responsibility. And I love that I need to do better with my kiddo, to ask him what was the rule. Let him take responsibility for what we talked about. And that's huge, because then that is teaching that personal responsibility, which then it applies to everything. It's not just this one issue. It's not just about screens or screen time. It's about there are rules that have consequences, and you need to be personally responsible for them. Yeah.
Another alternative could have been, you have this time limit that you all decided was reasonable. And so when you come downstairs and you see your child starting early, you could say, hey, I noticed that you are starting early today. So what time will you need to turn that off to make sure that you are within your time limit for the day?
Yeah.
So that then it teaches your child, okay, there's more than one way to honor the boundary or honor that limit. And I made the decision to start early, which means I have to be done earlier than everybody else.
Yeah, that would be good too. It makes me want to rethink even our little summer plan, like maybe revisit the conversation with them. Because what if it is that he really wants that time all alone in the morning? What if that's important to him? And I need to ask him and find that out and revisit it. Just because we decided it once doesn't mean that it's still holding true mid-July.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you just nailed it. That flexibility will lower the temperature on your frustration, and it honors your child's ability to change his mind about something. And so I think you nailed it.
All right. Good stuff.
Good stuff. All right. If you have not followed us on social media at the Brainy Moms, please do that. We love to interact with our followers. If you'd rather see our faces, we are on YouTube And you can catch us on our website at the Brainy Moms. Be sure to check out our sponsor, Learning RX. We talk about those cognitive skills, working memory, long-term memory, and processing speed, being deficient in ADHD, more than attention. And that's exactly what Learning RX addresses, is strengthening those cognitive skills that are necessary for thinking and learning all day, every day. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We're going to catch you next time.